Welcome to Evening Report's Tech Now. Tonight we talk to technology commentator Sarah Putt to dig into this week's big issues, and those include how and why international cyber attackers have been targeting New Zealand organisations. Also, there are big changes looming for how our emergency services communicate. Why is this change coming? What's the cost? And what will it mean for you and also for our first responders? And then media tech. Is print media really dead? And why is the New York Times a digital success? But first, here's an invitation to all of you who are joining us live. If you are joining us via Facebook, Twitter or YouTube, feel free to make comments, and if you do, we'll be able to include your interaction in the program. So let's cross to Sarah now and get on with our show. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Oh, that's very, very good, thank you. So this cyber attack business that's been going on and plaguing the New Zealand Stock Exchange and others, what's your take on that, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So it happened about a couple of weeks ago, and I think I remember mentioning it to you offhand on the program. And then we thought it was a denial of service attack, a distributed denial of service attack. So this idea that a whole bunch of zombie computers send a whole bunch of messages, a requests to a website, and basically shut it down because there's so much traffic coming towards it, it can't cope. Now, these things were very prevalent in the early 2000s, and people sort of saw it as kind of a form of cyber attack that was a little bit old-fashioned and a little bit of a blunt instrument. So what was surprising was that the NZX, our stock exchange, continued to receive these attacks from starting from Tuesday all through the rest of the week. They were on and offline, and then again into last week as well. And what that sort of said was, at first people were like, well, this is the NZX. Have they not taken the right precautions? What's going on here? And it turned out that it became more and more virulent, and other organisations started reporting issues as well. Everything from the Met Service through to the Ruapehu ski fields, would you believe? So it felt like there was something more going on. And the discourse, the commentary changed as well to this idea that we were looking at a very sophisticated attack, that where before there'd been what they could have called vectors, which is a way of thinking about it, different ways of attacking. Yeah. Whereas before there'd been one or two, now there are apparently 8, 2 of which were invented or came about in the last year or so. Yep. And one of them can actually amplify our attack 35 times. Yep. This was according to a commentator that I spoke to over at Darkscope, which is a security business in New Zealand, which basically looks through the internet and onto the dark web for their clients to see where, see what the landscape is like and if they're on in any sort of harm's way, if you like.
Yeah, and also your colleagues over at Reseller News, for example, Rob O'Neill, he went big on this, didn't he? He dug into the issue, and it was very helpful at the time. So the date of that was September the 1st, and of course it's September 8th now, so that's a week ago. And he's picking up on basically what you're saying there. Darkscope had been working on this and trying to define it. So what was the outcome of that article by Rob?
Well, what it looked at was saying that when we sort of got towards the end and the NZX came back online, things seemed to sort of quieten down, almost, as one commentator, fizzled out, although who would know out there what's going on. But what it seemed to be is that for the first time, rather than a DDoS in the past had been often used by ideology groups, Anonymous is a good example. So they were anti-capitalist, they had a sort of a political message that they wanted to get down, and they wanted to show their strength by saying, we can shut you down because we don't like what you're doing. This had now moved to what was many believed was a kind of like a ransom attack. So there's a very sort of standard email that they would send to say, in half an hour, soon we're going to shut your website down unless you pay us in Bitcoin. And this had, or a sort of cryptocurrency. And this was the sort of a common message that other organisations that had fallen victim to this kind of attack were receiving. Now, the government was clear, and through its different organisations, the first sort of line of attack is something called CERT NZ, which is really set up to help SMEs and consumers. Then you get up to the big guns, which is the GCSB, which is really there to protect large organisations and people, not just government departments, but organisations like the NZX, because remember,
Yes.
NZX is a private organisation.
Yes, so it was
considered critical national infrastructure.
So is it confirmed that the NZX was supposed to be being looked after by the GCSB's filter?
Well, that was sort of interesting that the GCSB actually came out and said that they were involved, because that's very rare. As you pointed out before, cybersecurity is very much hush hush. It's in spy land. People don't tend to talk about it. One, because often organisations are embarrassed that they've been hit by this, and two, because there's a certain amount of secrecy that surrounds it, because they're trying to protect the information, and it's very much a good guys bad guys situation. So actually, the Dark Scope team told me that it's almost like a game of tennis. They described it as. So the bad guys are hitting over, are lobbing over an attack and saying, "Can you see this coming?" And the good guys kind of have to work out how to stop it or combat it, if you like. The issue here was that it apparently seemed, certainly by the rate of the attacks and the amount of attacks, that they were not paying the ransom, that they were trying to deal with it themselves, all through with the GCSB. And the minister for the GCSB, Andrew Little, he actually went out publicly. I mean, he was on the TV, he was all over the place talking about this, because they felt that it was a public. The public interest was so high that they had to come out and say something.
Absolutely, they'd have to. So let's have a look at some of the ideas of who is behind this. For example, there's this fancy bear cyber security, cyber attacks, cyber hackers, if you like. And that's been mentioned in a number of occasions over the last week. And I notice in Rob's article here, I've just highlighted that for the viewers. It's a quote there that Rob is citing, the cybersecurity people in this article. And it says there, in fact, it's unlikely that these attacks do not match. What they're saying is it's unlikely that Fancy Bear was behind the attacks, as the behaviour, if you like, doesn't fit Fancy Bear's MO. It's MO. So let's just have a look at that, what we were talking about here. Now, in security circles at the moment, as the week has progressed from here, there is a school of thought that is suggesting that Fancy Bear is behind it. So let's just have a look. I'll just bring up on screen what Fancy Bear is. And it can, it is definitely getting into smoke and mirrors type of thing here. Now, this is clearly just a Wikipedia kind of pull on exactly how different organisations are defining Fancy Bear. It comes under a number of different names. And it's suggested here that it is closely associated with the Russian Federation's FSB, which is the modern day equivalent of the KGB, and also very close to Russian military intelligence, the GRU. Now, in past times, it is used, as it says down this page a little bit more, that the way it goes about its work is quite different to a DDoS. So that's where it looks like Rob's article is kind of a week ago is kind of saying, well, the behaviour here doesn't match what we were observing as a country and as security people or tech people on what was happening to the New Zealand Stock Exchange, or NZX, and others. But when you're getting down into it more, it seems like there's a lot of sensitivity around whether or not it is this strange shadowy group called Fancy Bear, which is, let's be quite frank, it is out in the private sphere. It's not the FSB directly, but it is said to be associated with both the SFB and GRU. If you get back to what is going on here, one of the scenarios, and one that Paul Buchanan put to me last Thursday in one of our programs, was that it is potentially a probe by overseas foreign powers that is testing out the resolve of and how effective the New Zealand GCSB is. How effective is its filter? The DDoS perhaps is one, like it was being used, and if you take that scenario further, it is being used as a way of breaking down, the strength of the server networks, etc., to be able to perhaps then see whether or not there is an ability to actually go further with a more significant probe into the actual system. If that, and this is where it gets difficult because it makes it sound like you're a bunch of conspiracy theory nutters. But remember that New Zealand's a part of the Five Eyes network. It is seen to have similar kind of protections in place around the GCSB as what the partners, the United States, Britain, Canada and Australia and New Zealand all have and share. It is, the school of thought would run that if this is a foreign actor, if it is the Russian Federation testing out how strong and how effective the shield, if you like, by our spy agencies, the GCSB, is, then it may be able to replicate an attack on a more serious partner at a later stage. Now remember, just underscore here that is all yet to be found to be right or wrong.
Absolutely. Or it could be just somebody out there, a very sophisticated group of hackers have worked out how to make money, and they're basically targeting, because my understanding is they target region by region. So it could be a money making operation. It could be something more serious. Again, it's really hard to ever know. Some of that is going to be out there. But what's really interesting is that it's certainly brought the whole idea around cybersecurity to the fore. One of the things that happened a couple of months ago is the Australians came out and said, we're putting $1 billion in this stuff and we're going to hire 500 cyber spies in the next wee while. And everybody in New Zealand went, well, okay, we're going to have to do it as well, because this stuff, what is our investment and is it keeping up with the sophistication that we're seeing around the world right now?
Yeah, where do you think this is going to be heading then, Sarah, in the short term? Because this is affecting people. There are ISPs exactly at the moment that have been fighting all day today, Tuesday, to try and actually make sure that their systems are robust, not in preventative measures, but actually trying to bat them off because they're active right now. If the stock exchange can be used as a model, is it fair to put a question to you about a prediction on how much determination is there with whoever is attacking that at the moment?
It's just, it always, whenever anyone says something like that around this issues, you always want to come back and go, well, where are you seeing the attacks? Because from your perspective, from what you've talked about, it could be politically motivated. Yep. It could also be, don't forget, they're not the only players in town. If they see vulnerabilities, and they see vulnerabilities in New Zealand, and they might not have even thought or considered this part of the world before, then all comers come in. So over the weekend, last weekend, we saw stuff, and RNZ came out and said they'd been attacked. It had only happened for half an hour, and they'd been able to fight it off.
Just on that point, sorry to interrupt, I've got a network of about 5 servers, that each one of them is in a respective area of the business. I was targeted around Friday through to about Monday. So it fizzled out yesterday. So that network there was under significant DDoS attack. It didn't, one of them I was able to address within a day, but there was another one that was going on. So that raises the question of, do you believe that we have got copycat kind of operations going?
Well, there's got to be. It's really hard. I'm not on the inside, so I'm not seeing all the information that's coming across. We're just hearing things from bits and bobs and pieces. And I don't think that there's ever been a time, it's one of those times where, as a journalist, you're just getting almost spammed by every single security company in the world. And quite honestly, there's quite a few of them, all with a different take on what's going on. That the attacks could have been just someone having a go, trying it on, seeing that there are vulnerabilities.
I think the original ones are a bit more than that, though, isn't it?
But that's what I mean. The ones that coming in,
the copycats.
It's kind of like suddenly highlighted a part of the world, or it could just be they're just flexing their muscles, because you would see why they would go after a high-profile media sites, because that's what they would see, from afar. Yeah. But so the other thing that sort of amused me through the week as we sort of saw the story unfold, and I thought generally as a media or across the board, even in mainstream, did a really good job of kind of trying to explain what was going on and show what was happening
to make sense of what was going
to
down.
make sense what was going on, because although the public the news stories moved on, if you like, and to your point, it's still being battled by companies and ISPs out there. We had this kind of imagery of this hacker, like this kind of under this hood and zeros and ones floating around. And, people said, look, that's not what the hacker is these days. I mean, a lot of them are just living in countries where we don't have extradition treaties with, making lots of money. They'll never be held to account and causing mayhem. So, again, it's just, I think, if anything, if you haven't already, and you're a little bit worried, then go to CERT, have a look at its tips, and get yourself some, and take security seriously. We've all got to do it, right?
At both, if you've got server kind of make sure the servers are actually all kitted out as well.
Talk to your ISP.
And talk to your ISP. Try and get an idea from them. What is the best security software that you can get that you can trust? Because that's a big issue. Big issue with a lot of people. They may not trust some of the ones coming out of the United States. Some may prefer a different place. So the ISP will be able to put people right on this.
And remember with that, you want to keep it as far away from your network as possible. That's why the ISP is the line of defense. You want it away from your infrastructure as much as you can.
Because that's where it can kind of keep. And also the ISPs, obviously the most significant ones are working with the GCSB to try and actually get, a big filter going on right at the gateway to the country as well. Obviously, it wasn't working to the satisfaction, which leads, before we wrap this particular issue up, Sarah, should the government have done more to stop this? Should the GCSB have been more onto this particular type of thing? And was the NZX found with its tech and digital pants down on this?
Well, it would be really nice if we could see exactly and get a blow by blow. I don't think we're going to, for two reasons. One is there's a certain amount of, as I talked before, they keep some things to themselves. It's like a crime fighting tool, that police don't tell you everything that happened at a crime because they want people to come forward, and information is a tool, right? The other thing as well is that the NZ is a private organisation. So one of the advantages when you're reporting on public sector organisations is that when anything like this goes wrong, is usually followed by a full SIM report that you can sort of go down line by line and see what happened. Doesn't always work with private.
But remember, there is that, like what you talked about before too, there's that partnership that the GCSB branded itself very significantly on in the wake of legislative and post-legislative reform under the John Key-led government. And that was to protect essential infrastructures in the country from exactly this type of thing. So that's where the question was going to, and I guess that's probably the answers will come in the future, more than in the midst of this whole thing. But certainly, it's certainly been a wake-up call, and I think your advice was very sage advice there, Sarah. ISPs are the gateway to everybody. Just an email to their support teams to see exactly what's going down and what they recommend. That would be fantastic. Let's go to the transition. Then we'll come back with emergency services. Our first responders, there's a big shake-up in the communications, the digital communications all around that. So be right back with you. Ooh, there we're back again, Sarah. So emergency services rollout. What's this about here? Emergency services are ditching the walkie-talkies. They're getting that out. They're going to chuck them in the ditch. What are they going to replace? Not yet. When is this going to happen, and what's going to happen?
No. Well, one of the surprising things about this story is it came out about a week ago. The Minister for Police, I think it was, put out a release saying that they were actually going to upgrade the emergency services, the communications. So, got on the phone, found out what happened, And basically, a lot of the tech is 30 years old, would you believe? Wow. Walkie-talkies. Now, take an example of a multiple car crash, which, hopefully nobody has ever had to be involved in. But you've got all of them attending, our first responders. You've got the fire people attending with the jaws of life. Yep. You've got the police, obviously, and you've got the ambulance. And all of them are doing it via, radio communication. Whereas nowadays we've got things like video. We've got things like, data, all sorts of things, all these sorts of things that they can be transmitting back to base, and the dispatcher can actually be, who's sitting there making the call as to who to send and when and how, can be watching and seeing this thing by video. But none of that is happening at the moment. So the government's put up $47 million to do this over the next 5 years.
That's serious money, isn't it? So, this is just going back on memory. The police, some years ago now, they moved from, their communications went more digital, didn't it? So that people sitting there with their scanners, and in the past, in the 1990s, people would sit there and listen to what the cops were doing. Oh my goodness, they'd be thinking, didn't realise our neighbourhoods were so under attack by criminals. There's so much activity going on. Next thing you know, couldn't hear a thing. The airways are just whispering static back at them, and they'd move to some sort of digital thing. So is this is a continuum of that, or is there a complete reshaping of the whole thing?
It's looking at a bit of a rehaul. If all the emergency services, the police have probably the most enabled with digital technology, but what you can imagine is a future whereby, because the technology itself has changed. So you can imagine a future, to go back to my motorable car crash scene, and I'm sorry to take people there.
No,
if the fire turns up and it's an electric car, they can't just chomp in with those jaws of life to free people, because they get electrocuted. Yeah. So it's data to get the schematics of the car so they can do that safely.
Okay.
You can get people into an ambulance, and you can start sending the information through to the hospital or the emergency service area, with the emergency department, where they're going, and so they can be prepared for when that patient arrives. Okay. I think people will be surprised that doesn't happen already, but then we notice, and we've spoken before about the woeful state of our health IT systems, and how, not only do you have to get the tech in place, you've got to get the privacy and security stuff there organised as well. And then you've got just, like I said before, just that the fact that, the police are there recording the scene, doing crowd control, but also trying to work out whether or not it's going to be a prosecution later on. Yep. So all of that stuff at the moment is mostly being done through pretty old tech. Yep. And the idea is to bring it up to spec, not with specialised, bespoke technology, but with stuff that's coming off the shelf from the big vendors.
Okay, modular approach to this.
Yeah, well, the idea is you
plug it on.
The idea is you want to be able to apply off the shelf exactly what everybody else is using, obviously tailoring it for your particular need. And apparently these big vendors are also really specializing a lot in comms, in emergency comms. But the idea is, because what happens is, once everything gets updated all the time, like, we talk about instant updates, all of that kind of thing. You want your tech to be on the roadmap. You do not want to have a bespoke service or network. That stuff's gone. Okay,
so there's two things here. I'll just get you to reiterate when we can expect this rollout to occur. And secondly, we've just been talking about cybersecurity. Heaven forbid if they were hacked during something like this. So how do you future-proof that kind of tech, communication?
I wouldn't want to even think about that kind of thing, especially if I'm thinking about health records. Yep. So the first thing is governance. Governance is really important, because the amount of stakeholders in this thing is huge. You've got obviously the two ambulance societies plus the fire, the police, and so there's a huge amount of just people on the ground who just work on this stuff. But they have also announced a governance committee, which is headed by Rob Fife, who is the former CEO of Air New Zealand and also used to work Telecom back in the day. So it's quite a good get, actually. Yeah. And then another person on the board, which I thought was really interesting, is a guy who had been the president when FirstNet. Now, this is with the American version. They put in one about 3 or 4 years ago, probably a bit longer than that, and he was the president, and it's called FirstNet, and it's very, very similar kind of thing, upgrading the emergency services, and they sort of felt a need to do it after 9/11. Okay. So so you've got some good oversight there, I think.
Okay. Well, we'll take another quick transition. We'll come back with this. Is print media dead, and what is a digital media success story in this day and age? Let's have a look. Welcome back, Sarah. The New York Times, I understand, is the poster child for the new wave of digital media. And it has
Well,
successfully transitioned from, the good old black and white
all the
pages,
news that's fit to print.
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
what's this
thought
about?
this one caught my eye, and I think it's because we're probably a couple of media people that we like to hear about media.
Yeah.
But the New York Times I just think it's such an interesting experiment in terms of digital, because they totally swung back from being, they said we're digital agnostic, it's the news wherever it is, and then they turned and they said we're digital orthodox, therefore we're going to tailor our offering depending on the platform, and by golly, we're going to charge for it, because that's where we see the future. And I mean, I personally am a New York Times subscriber, and I've only ever been there for 2 days once my whole life. So, but it's such a fantastic, such fantastic journalism that I just love to be part to read it every day. And this is what they did in 2012 when the new CEO took over, and he's just retired, which is why the stories come up. He realized that they had to embrace digital, and the subs were actually going backwards. But he realized that you can't charge for online what you can charge in a print version. But what you have to do is you just have to grow a subscriber base. So he's taken it in 8 years from 500,000 to 5.7 million subscribers.
And I'm reading the notes here. They expect to reach by 2025, so in 5 years' time, 10 million. So they want to double their subscription base now. Now, they're making money off their subscribers in the same way that perhaps in the heyday when print was king, queen.
No, they're not. It's your print subscriber is always worth a lot more money. And that's not just from the advertising perspective, it's also from the fact that people pay more, like it adds up more, right? Having said all of that, it's a quantity game, right?
Yeah.
So basically the more subscribers you have, and of course, if you can get them in New Zealand and Australia and around the world where you wouldn't have before. I mean, I would not have subscribed to the print edition. It wouldn't make any sense.
No.
I wouldn't get it for a week.
I remember, when first got into journalism and go along to the library, to the reading room, was it, or something like that anyway. And there was all the newspapers and magazines from all around the world.
Lovely?
It was about 3 months old or something, and you'd have a read. It was just very interesting being able to see the writing styles, as you're developing your own writing style, I suppose, if we have one. But now, of course, it seems like the New York Times has really mastered the art of convergence. Can you speak to those points a little bit?
Yes, I think it has. And what it did was, in the old days, and I think a lot of newspapers did this, and I definitely think they did them in New Zealand, but they started with the print version and then they ripped it off for the online. Whereas now they've gone the other way. They start with the smartphone app, then they go to the website, and then it goes into print. So it goes the other way, because that's how people read news.
Look, that's interesting. Just on that point, for media people, it's probably interesting, but for everyone else, it won't be, maybe. But I remember way back in the mid-1990s, I was lucky enough to be a small group of people that a guy who was the features editor of the Oregonian, a guy called Jack Hart, came over. It was way back when INL, well before Fairfax, well before Stuff, and he talked us through front-end editing, which was something that it took the writer all the way through. So if you juxtaposition this around, because the old way of basically the journalist, it goes over to a chief reporter, and then it might go through a sub-editor, and then maybe the editor, or all different ways of configuring that. Well, Jack Hart was saying the journalist has got to be at the product end as well, so that anything that, like Chinese whispers, that takes the strength or the reliability of the message can be rectified. So what this kind of idea of what you're saying there of placing right at the front here, and it inches its way backwards, if you like, on a backwards timeline back to print. Seems like perhaps that's a little bit of that kind of thinking. Would that be fair?
I think it's fair. I think it's about taking something and realizing that you can't take what was in print and stick it up online and have the same result, and all the advertisers will come or whatever else. But I also, that was just, and you have to be fair, that was what had worked for 150 years or wherever it was. That was a wonderfully tried and true model with the back of, the rivers of gold, the back with the classifieds. But what I think the New York Times has shown, and really, let's face it, I mean, the number of journalists they employ I can't remember the exact number, but no, that's their moat. When we talk about business, what's your moat? What is the bit that surrounds your business that no one can replicate? That's their moat. It's quality journalism.
Yeah.
No one else can replicate that kind of.
Well, maybe the Guardian, from the other
that's
side.
what I mean.
Yeah,
maybe 10 papers in the whole world.
Yeah. Not a lot of them.
It's in English-speaking countries and all that kind of thing, so you can see, that's what they realized, is that they saw all these sort of people come in, the BuzzFeeds, whatever, come in and take the media sort of spotlight and pull it towards them, but they never quite managed. Then they sort of woke up to the idea of, hey, we've got really good journalism here. Why don't we sell that?
The tradition of it.
I want to say is, let's stop selling stuff around journalism. Let's just sell journalism because it's really good.
Okay.
When it's good, it's really good.
And it can make sense of all the noise, can't it? And I guess that's the challenge, and that's perhaps the future for journalism in a sense. How long will print last? Are we looking into the 2030s? Is it going to die soon? What's the point in trying to keep those alive?
Well, they reckon this guy reckons that, and he's been the CEO of the New York Times for 8 years, and people will know that it's owned by a private company, private family. But
obviously not the Trump's family, because it's not the US president's not a fan of the New York Times, is he?
But the New York Times is a little bit of a fan of Donald Trump, because their hits went whoosh and their subs went up.
He's a commodity of sorts. Yeah.
They got like 240 unique page views in the month of March. 240 million.
Yeah.
200 million.
I was going to say. Yeah.
Tech now can only dream. We might get there, though.
Oh, well, if we get 24 something, that will be okay.
We'll be happy.
So you think it's going to be dead in the 2030s, print?
They reckon the paper version will probably go through until the 30s, which is saying something. When we saw the NBR, the National Business Review, dump its paper version recently, so people have hung on because the revenue is still there, and there is something to be said for a beautifully curated magazine or a newspaper every morning in your on your doorstep. I think that's something very valuable, but they reckon another 10 years at least.
Right.
But it's not going to last forever.
Yeah, and it would be a sad thing in some ways. Like we all know, when we pick up a book, and I'm enjoying a book very much at the moment that is written by a friend of mine, Barbara Sumner, and I'd really encourage people to get a copy of that book once it is officially launched later this month. Fantastic book. Picking up a book and having a good read, it is such a wonderful thing, and it's the same with the newspaper. In many ways, it'll be sad to see it go, and obviously it's because of the economics around it. Look, before we go, Sarah, we've got a very good comment here from Juliana Vening, and I'll just bring it up on screen. And she's talking here about Kathy Reich's latest book, touches on a conspiracy of bones. Read the dark web. So this is getting into what we were talking about before. I'll just bring it up on screen again because we've got a bit of a time maximum thing there.
Kathy Reichs, I think I interviewed her once many years ago.
Did you? Yeah. People would remember the bones on TV and all the books, that were around a forensic scientist, isn't it? And she and Juliana's talking here. Let's bring it up again. Who wrote a book about it? Also, I subscribe to New York Times. $4.70 a week. So there you go. That's
fantastic.
That's pretty good for.
Also subscribe to our lovely local papers as well, though, because there's a lot of fantastic. And I call them papers still because I'm old-fashioned, but there's some great journalism going on.
And you've got to say that there's a real strong reconfiguration of New Zealand media at the moment, and it's got to be a good thing, despite the big sale of TV3 or Media Week selling the TV elements of its enterprise to the United States interests.
Oh, well, positively, we're seeing green shoots with lots of subscriber papers as well. Can I just say, on the Kathy Reichs front, I said to her once, what did you think of Martha Gellhorn? Because Martha Gellhorn we're talking about great journalists. She was a great journalist, and she, of course, was, and unfortunately, I don't like to stereotype her in this way, but she was Ernest Hemingway's third wife. Oh. But she got her start in New York, and what she'd do is every morning, and this is what journalists do at their heart, she'd visit the morgue. She was on the morgue round. That's where they put the juniors, and she'd go to the morgue every morning, and she'd say, what happened last night, which is how I started in my career as well. Ring the cops ring all the police stations.
I did too, but the police didn't like me very much, and they just used to hang up or yell out, "What do you want, Manning?" I remember we're in the same newsroom. You had much better success with the police than I did. I'm not sure why. So on that note, let's wrap it up. It's been very good, Sarah. Great chat and very revealing on many of those issues there. Thank you very much for this episode of Tech Now. And until next week, to everybody, take care.